Let me start by seeing if you recognize this anywhere. When you think things are bad, when you feel sour and blue, when you start to get mad, you should do what I do. Just tell yourself, ducky, you're really quite lucky. Don't grumble, don't stew. Some people are much more, oh, ever so much more, oh, much more unlucky than you. Dr. Seuss then goes on to say, you're not in bad traffic. You don't have a job painting flagpoles. You don't have a crumpled horn or webbed feet or a green beard or unsolvable knots in your tail, and so you shouldn't grumble. There's someone always worse off than you. Now that sounds really great, and maybe even has a little bit of moral teaching for us. But I guess the question is that really the reason why we should not be grumbling? So as we look at Numbers 10 to 12 and explore this, let's start by praying. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you so much that you speak to us in your word, the Bible, and we pray now that you would quieten our minds, help us to think hard about what you are saying, help us to see the warnings, but also the encouragements, and help us to therefore be even more confident to walk with Jesus all the days of our lives. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, in the first 10 chapters, so far, things have been very positive as we walk through Numbers. The people of God, after being rescued from slavery in Egypt, have now finished preparing for their journey. They are ordered as God has ordered them, and they are a holy community, living God's way, wholeheartedly relying on Him and His holistic care. If you have been reading from chapters 2 to 9, the refrain that keeps being mentioned, the Israelites did just as the Lord commanded Moses. It's a beautiful picture of this holistic care, and it's seen maybe in a little scene right at the end of chapter 10, when the people are just about to set out for the first time. Have a look at it. Chapter 10, verse 29. Now Moses said to Hobab, son of Ruel the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law, we are setting out for the place about which the Lord said, I will give it to you. Come with us, and we will treat you well, for the Lord has promised good things to Israel. Moses wants his brother-in-law Hobab because, 10:31, you know where we should camp in the wilderness, and you can be our eyes. Now, this is a bit of a weird scene, you might think, but it really does teach us a lot about God's holistic care. How God, in giving of Himself, also places other people in our midst. And it should immediately challenge the kind of thinking that means that sometimes we limit our understanding of what it means to rely on God. We sometimes forget that He provides people with the skills to help us. You see, we can rely on God and we can appreciate the help of others who God might put in our path to help us. This is the reality of all of us. We are at the same time weak in needing help and strong when we seek help. Let me say it again. We are weak in needing help and strong when we seek help. God provides Moses a Hobab, and Moses convinces Hobab of God's reliable and generous ways. See, while Hobab initially says no to Moses, he was reassured that the Lord promised, I will give it to you, verse 29, and that Hobab too could share in these good things, verse 32. And in our very largely individualistic society, we need to hear this. It comes about in so many ways, but here's just one. Over the years, doing the Hope and Healing course, our divorce care program, one thing in various forms that keeps coming up with people is something that sounds a bit like this. I trust in God fully. And me trusting in God fully means I can't go and seek help from medical professionals like a psychologist or a counselor because I want to trust in God fully and not trust in people. You see, that sounds a little bit wrong to us. And it is a little bit wrong because God gives us community and help in many forms. And for what it's worth, he doesn't get angry when we access this help. See, accessing help does not show a lack of trust in God, despite all of Numbers so far being about relying on God. If anything, it shows that God is generous and merciful even to those who aren't his people, who are invited to come into his gathered community. And as God invites us in, he calls us to serve each other with the gifts and experiences he has given us for the sake of this new family. Hobab had a part to play with his insider knowledge of the place, but it was the Lord who made a promise to give the people the land, and the Lord is the promise keeper. And in the 3-day journey, hear the confident and triumphant cries of Moses. 10:35. Whenever the ark set out, Moses said, "Rise up, Lord. May your enemies be scattered. May your foes flee before you." Whenever it came to rest, he said, "Return, Lord, to the countless thousands of Israel." See, Moses had no doubt of the Lord's control and provision for all that the people needed. Now, if the first 10 chapters had been really, really positive, the journey has only very barely begun when we see the first hints of grumbling. Chapter 11, verse 1. Now the people complained about their hardships in the hearing of the Lord, and when he heard them, his anger was aroused. In one sense, these first 3 verses become kind of a type of people grumbling against God, a pattern for it. Here's the pattern. 1, the people grumble. 2, the Lord's anger is kindled. 3, he reacts in righteous judgment. 4, a leader intercedes. As the people complained about their hardships, second half of 1, then fire from the Lord burned among them and consumed some of the outskirts of the camp. God's fire is so destructive that it even consumes some of the fringes of the camp. Then the people cry out to Moses to act as a mediator between them and God. Verse 2, when the people cried out to Moses, he prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. God listens to Moses, and things calm down, and then a name is given to the place where this incident happens, really so that it might be etched into the memory of the people, so they would remember the lesson for next time. Verse 3, the place was called Taberah, because fire from the Lord had burned among them. But of course, it doesn't take long before the people forget. And I think here is what it all seems to boil down to. The grumbling is a sign of the people's failure to trust in their saving and sustaining God. And of course, this shouldn't be a surprise to us. As it was then, so it is now. God's people, Israel, complained and it was not good. God's people now, the church, we complain and it is not good. The Apostle Paul, he warns us of this, citing incidents that come from the book of Numbers. Have a look at it, 1 Corinthians 10. Do not grumble, as some of them did, and were killed by the destroying angel. These things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us, on whom the culmination of the ages has come. So, if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. Now, if this episode that ended in verse 3, if this was it, then I think that would be enough. We have seen the sort of anger kindled because of complaint. And so the application is very clear. Do not grumble. But of course, verse 4 has more grumbling. People doubt God and his provision. Verse 4, the rabble with them began to crave other food. And again the Israelites started wailing and said, if only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish that we ate in Egypt at no cost. Also the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onion, garlic. But now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna. The rabble, those on the edge of the camp, who are most likely the kind of people who saw the amazing things that God did and then attached themselves to Israel's camp. These are the outskirts of the people of God who wanted to follow Israel, and so they came along and they grumble. They absolutely hated that all they got to eat was manna. Now, context is important. If you recall the narrative in Exodus, after God takes his people out of slavery in Egypt and into the desert, the people grumbled against Moses and Aaron. Exodus 16, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted, but you have brought us out into the desert to starve this entire assembly. And so God provided them with manna, bread from heaven. It was a generous provision from God, the God who not only saves but also sustains his people, giving them what they need. And now the grumbling has changed. Now the grumbling is against the manna. It sounded maybe something like this: if only we had meat to eat. We had sashimi grade fish. We had crisp and fresh salads. Now all we have is manna 7 ways: manna cakes, manna soups, stir-fried manna, manna cold, manna hot, and it is very boring. There's only so much manna we can eat, seriously. And lest you judge Israel, just imagine what it's like when you've cooked a little bit too much. Leftovers day 1, leftovers day 2, leftovers day 3. There's only so much chicken curry I can eat. And yet there is a lesson for us on the essence of grumbling in this. And here's the lesson: it makes us forget. See, when we complain about how good things used to be back then, our memories of the past are not always as clear as they seem. Yes, maybe it's true they had really good cucumbers and leeks and sashimi in Egypt. But they also had to make bricks without straw. They were also beaten mercilessly. They watched their baby boys get thrown into the Nile River by genocidal tyrants who just wanted to control them because they were procreating too quickly. See, it's really easy to forget the negative and fixate on the one craving you wish you could satisfy. And it's true for them just like it's true for us. Do we sometimes complain about how easy and enjoyable our lives used to be before we became Christians? I never used to worry about getting drunk. I never used to worry about exploring things sexually, the pressure to give to the church, the pressure of standing up and adorning the gospel in my workplace. The pressure of standing up and adorning the gospel in my workplace where people are hostile and mocking of Jesus. They call us these stupid Jesus people. The awkwardness of trying to be generous and welcoming to strange people that are culturally different from me and maybe make me feel a little bit uncomfortable. The lack of time I now have because I have more responsibilities. I have to serve others as well as not abdicate responsibility where there is opportunity. Everyone else has the weekends off. They can switch off at night. I have church. I have growth teams. I have monthly prayer meetings. I also have to prep for whatever area I'm serving in. See, life was easy before I started following Jesus, but now life is like a desert and maybe it's just a bit too much. Maybe that's overstating it, but is there a bit of that in what you sometimes think? But also think about how that's not the full picture. As we face these stresses, sure, it's hard. God doesn't promise it won't be. But what about forgiveness of sin? Salvation from the eternal damnation to come for those who are not in Jesus. Adoption into a new and glorious family. And was it so good pre-Jesus? Did we really know what life was? Do those around us who don't know Jesus look like they know how to live a full and rich life? Slaves to mortgage, slaves to money, slaves to the finer things, slaves to the extracurricular activity for our children, slaves to health issues, slaves to relationship breakdowns and vulnerability, as we hurt others and others hurt us. Slaves to an uncertain life without purpose or peace or love. Do you see how selective it is? Looking at the past, it just makes us blind to what we really have. That's the kind of thing that's happening to Israel. as they complain about the manna. And just notice the narrator doesn't want us to fall into the lies of this grumbling. Verse 7 to 9 show us how great manna really is. First, it tasted like coriander seed. Spice is good. It brings taste. It's excellent. But also it looked like resin, a highly prized and very expensive gum. It's a bit like myrrh. And resin is mentioned in Genesis 2, pre the fall, alongside gold. Manna is very special. It's not ordinary. And it could be eaten in many different ways. And a little note, it tasted something like something made with olive oil. In other words, it was rich and fancy. So when you think manna, you think Michelin star restaurant quality meal, not leftovers in the fridge for 2 days meal. The people, you see, are blind to the blessings of the past and the present. They doubt whether God really has their best interest at heart, and so they grumble. And for what it's worth, they've forgotten their future. A land flowing with milk and honey is coming. A land that, at least geographically, was only a few days away. Instead of remembering accurately that manna was amazing and temporary because of the land flowing with milk and honey that was coming soon, verse 10, Moses heard the people of every family wailing at the entrance to their tents. The Lord became exceedingly angry, and Moses was troubled. The people, they wailed. Not the rabble anymore, now every family. And how infectious is grumbling that it spread throughout all 605,000 men plus women and children. And God was angry with them. They had forgotten what he had done for them and what he was continuing to do for them, including that he was with them. All of what we looked at in chapters 2 to 9 was to show how the system worked so God was with his people, and they forgot all of it because of leeks and cucumbers. And it's a challenge for us as a church, isn't it? If good company can build us up, and we are exhorted throughout the New Testament to keep encouraging one another, especially as the day approaches, then bad company can corrupt us through and through after a while. Even Moses, in the face of all this grumbling, even he doubted a little bit if God would help him lead these people. And we can learn from that too. Think about this. Have you ever felt, maybe a little bit, like the place you are serving is filled with grumblers? And that maybe it's a bit too much and you'd rather die, or at least just give up and walk away from your responsibilities. Remember that God can provide where we cannot. He provides for his people and for those with responsibility to lead those people. And despite doubts from Moses, God actually answers Moses and promises a solution to both the issues that have come up. First issue, Moses needs help. Second issue, the people want meat. First, he helps Moses by providing 70 elders, given the same Spirit of the Lord that was given to Moses. Verse 17, also that they will share the burden of the people. They will share the burden of the people with you so that you will not have to carry it alone. God provides for his needs graciously. Moses could have just asked for God's help, but even with his grumbling, God is gracious and provides. And at least Moses was willing to talk to God about the problem. If you remember, the people had just rejected God completely and started talking amongst themselves and daydreaming about going back into slavery where there were cucumbers. Remember verse 1? God heard them. They didn't come to him. And so as a way to teach them, God gives them over to their cravings and provides meat for the people. The second need, verse 18. Tell the people, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow when you will eat meat. The Lord heard you when you wailed, if only we had meat to eat. We were better off in Egypt. Now the Lord will give you meat and you will eat it. And you will not eat it just for 1 day or 2 days or 5 or 10 or 20 days, but for a whole month, until it comes out of your nostrils and you loathe it because you have rejected the Lord, who is among you, and have wailed before him, saying, why did we ever leave Egypt? They grumble about meat, and so God is going to give them so much meat they'll have meat sweats. Maybe more accurately, they'll have quail sweats. And God will make the people feel about quail as God feels about their grumbling. It is despicable. Now, Moses here, at this point, he has more doubts. Verse 21, he has more doubts. Moses said, "Here I am among 600,000 men on foot, and you say, I will give them meat to eat for a whole month? Would they have enough if flocks and herds were slaughtered for them? Would they have enough if all the fish of the sea were caught for them?" You see, Moses is again doubting God's provision. Surely there is no bovine farm in all of the Middle East to provide for 600,000 men, let alone women and children. Or should we just remove all the fish of the sea? Maybe that'll be enough to feed these people. This is classic defensive hyperbole. And the Lord answers Moses, "Is the Lord's arm too short? Now you will see whether or not what I say will come true for you." God's basically asking Moses if he thinks that God's arm has somehow become weak. Has God, who miraculously brought these people out of an impossible position of slavery in Egypt under the hand of mighty Pharaoh, suddenly gone limp? Or perhaps is God still mighty to look after his own and deliver on the promises that he has already made? The same God who brought the plagues of hail and frogs and darkness and blood water and even the death of the firstborn sons, and did this all in the land of the world's greatest superpower. The God who then split a sea in half so the people that he loves and cares for could walk out. This God somehow doesn't seem like he'll have any trouble feeding those same people. If the great deliverance is possible, how much more can we trust him for the small things? And that's really the pattern, isn't it? Greater to smaller. And we as New Covenant Christian people who also so often struggle with the lack of faith or trust in God, we need to remember exactly the same point. God always delivers on his promises. Think about what the Apostle Paul says in Romans 8. If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, greater, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things smaller? And so, as we learn from Numbers and see how Jesus has fulfilled such things, let us not grumble, but trust in the God who provides. And what God said would happen, happens. Verse 31, a wind or spirit went out and brought so much quail that it took a day, a night, and then all of the next day just to gather the quail. No one gathered less than 10 homers, which is about approximately 1.6 metric tons each, just in case you were wondering how much quail they had. Verse 33, but while the meat was still between their teeth, they hadn't swallowed yet, before it could be consumed, the anger of the Lord burned against the people, and he struck them with a severe plague. Maybe the first time we see bird flu. The graveyard of grumbling greed. That's what it was, because that's what the pattern does. So that they remembered the lesson. As the severe plague happened and they died, the place, verse 34, was called Kibroth Hattaavah, because there they buried the people who had craved other food. The graveyard of grumbling greed. It is a memorial to their sin, so that they might remember. But they do not, and we don't either. And to drive the point home, we see another illustrative episode in chapter 12. With the same idea of complaint and sin and even envy. And Miriam and Aaron doubt God's provision. Chapter 12, verse 1. Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his Cushite wife, for he had married a Cushite. Now, if you think about Old Testament and you think about repetition in the Old Testament, notice that Cushite is mentioned twice in one sentence, and that's a bit weird. Perhaps it's because Moses' wife was not a Jew. Whatever is going on, the underlying motive for the attack on Moses is envy. Chapter 12, verse 2. Has the Lord spoken only through Moses, they asked? Hasn't he also spoken through us? And the Lord heard this. And they're kind of right. Exodus 15, Miriam is described as a prophetess. In Leviticus, Aaron is instituted as high priest. And yet they went after Moses to undermine him. But the Lord hears. He hears everything. There is no grumble or complaint the Lord does not hear, including against our spiritual leaders. We are exhorted instead to encourage our spiritual leaders. Have a look at it. Hebrews 13. Have confidence in your leaders and submit to their authority, because they keep watch over you as those who must give an account. Do this, thanks bro, do this so that their work will be a joy, not a burden, for that would be of no benefit to you. And God asserts the uniqueness of Moses. Moses is God's unique provision. God hears Aaron and Miriam, and the narrator tells us that Moses is more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. And so God himself comes down in a pillar of cloud to deal with this problem. Verse 6, he said, "Listen to my words. When there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, reveal myself to them in visions. I speak to them in dreams. But this is not true of my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak face to face, clearly and not in riddles. He sees the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses?" See, Moses is unlike other prophets. God speaks clearly and audibly, face to face with him. In fact, in Exodus 33, Moses was privileged to glimpse the form of the Lord. What Moses reveals of the Lord to the people is far clearer and better than any other prophet of the Lord up to that point. And because Miriam spoke against Moses, she had to face the shame of God's punishment, which came because the anger of the Lord burned against Miriam and Aaron. See the pattern again, just like the model at the beginning. People grumble, God responds in judgment. Chapter 12, verse 9, the anger of the Lord burned against them, and he left them. When the cloud lifted from above the tent, Miriam's skin was leprous. It became as white as snow. Now, I wonder if this is a play on words regarding God's justice. In this episode, we have already heard the repeated mention of Moses' wife being a Cushite. Now, for context, the Cushite people made up what would now be Sudan, Kenya, Tanzania, that kind of area. And if it were that Miriam and Aaron were in some part using that racially motivated excuse to mask their grumbling and envy, then God's response in judgment is, if you think that being white is better, behold, Miriam's skin was leprous. It was completely white. This isn't the main point. It isn't grumbling and envy, which is at the heart of Miriam and Aaron's complaint. But it does start to show the layers of sin and the justice of God. And Aaron then begs Moses to intercede on behalf of Miriam. He feels it as much as Miriam does. Look at it. Aaron turned toward her and saw that she had a defiling skin disease. And he said to Moses, "Please, my Lord, I ask you not to hold against us the sin we have so foolishly committed. Do not let her be like a stillborn infant coming from its mother's womb, with its flesh half eaten away." And of course, Moses prays that Miriam would be healed, and God heals her. But it isn't just a restoration back to her normal self. She is forced to suffer the humiliation of being excluded from the people for 7 days for being unclean. Verse 14, the Lord replied to Moses, "If her father had spit in her face, would she not have been in disgrace for 7 days? Confine her outside the camp for 7 days. After that, she can be brought back." So Miriam was confined outside the camp for 7 days, and the people did not move on until she was brought back. Miriam is banished outside the camp, and will need to stay there long enough to reflect on what she had said and done. The journey to the promised land is delayed for everyone. And it's interesting, because of grumbling, and grumbling at God's provision, it meant that some of the people were delayed and others didn't make it at all. They died because of their grumbling. And can you see, even just from this little story, the significant consequences of grumbling against God? Significant consequences for those who have seen God, and yet for some reason still, even those seeing His good works, do not trust in God. Those who do not remember the power of God, who do not rely wholeheartedly on God. And we learn that in Moses, God provided something very, very special. A leader, a mediator, a prophet. A humble man with direct access to God like nobody else. And yet with Moses, we still see his complexity. He's given such high standing and such high compliments. And yet in chapter 11, we see his clear imperfections. With all the people making noise and grumbling, even he gets flustered and starts to doubt God's good provision and ability. He was overwhelmed by the grumbling of the people, and so he wished he would die, even doubting that God could do what looked impossible. And this back and forth in terms of how we are meant to think about Moses, this is helpful for us. He grumbled in chapter 11, but then he says something so prophetically significant in chapter 11. Remember that little scene that we just skipped past? There are these significant words he says when speaking to Joshua, which show that his heart is aligned with God's. Joshua had been jealous that Eldad and Medad were prophesying by the Spirit of the Lord. And Moses' response, 11:29, "Are you jealous for my sake? I wish that all the Lord's people were prophets, and that the Lord would put His Spirit on them." And of course, that is exactly what God would do. One day in the future, He would pour out His Spirit on both Jews and Gentiles, which He did through one truly unique prophet, more than a prophet, without any question regarding His character. You see, if God had revealed Himself in dribs and drabs in the past, He reveals Himself clearly and definitively in the person of His Son, the exact radiance and representation of His being. Here's how the writer of Hebrews puts it, partly quoting from Numbers 12, Hebrews chapter 3. "He was faithful to the one who appointed him, just as Moses was faithful in all God's house. Jesus has been found worthy of greater honor than Moses, just as the builder of a house has greater honor than the house itself. For every house is built by someone, but God is the builder of everything. Moses was faithful as a servant in all God's house, bearing witness to what would be spoken by God in the future. But Christ is faithful as the Son over God's house. And we are His house, if indeed we hold firmly to our confidence and the hope in which we glory." God is strong, and God will deliver. We can trust Him to provide for us. And as the argument goes in Hebrews, how much more now that we have seen Jesus clearly? Jesus is greater than Moses. And so, my friends, heed the warning. Don't fall into the sin of grumbling that forgets and does not trust in the God who saves and the God who provides. And remember the pattern: greater, so we can have confidence with the lesser. Jesus has died and risen again for us. What more won't He give those whom He loves?